Doctor Who is back, or at least was, after the 60th anniversaries set up a reboot for the show as a new jumping off point for new fans and something new and exciting for old fans, with a higher budget courtesy of the Big Mouse. Now, with the 60th specials causing such a big impact on the Who-niverse, breaking the laws of what we know and all of that, there was a lot I feel like this season had to do. With Russell T Davies back as showrunner and writing 6 out of the 8 episodes, I think the expectations were very high for this season. And I think in terms of scale of the world and storytelling, it was clear from the marketing that they were aiming for new heights this year. But the fact is, and spoilers for my opinion, that I think this is Davies' worst season by a decent margin. The Giggles ending kind of ruined the world building that could have happened in this season, because I truly have no idea if the thread is going to come back around about the 14th Doctor just being on Earth with the TARDIS, and based off the lines at the end of the Giggle, he is still using his TARDIS, he's still going out and taking Rose out and stuff like that. As much as I like the Giggle and think it's a really great episode, it really shafts this season and ruins any potential world building, because there's also just another TARDIS. And I like what they do with 14, but from a world building perspective, it kind of affects this season negatively.
Space babies!
The entire story starts at the Christmas special, which is a fun episode, a light-hearted Christmas special with a good introduction to the new Doctor and new companion that serves as a much better opening than Space Babies, which is my least favourite episode of this season, without a doubt. I think the setup is intriguing with a cool looking creature and an alien vibe, and I think the direct lead-in from the Christmas special is fun. But it derails into just uncomfortable uncanniness with the Space Babies. Having them talk like that was just really creepy, and I was not a fan. It continues the threaded theme of abandonment, because the Doctor and Ruby were both abandoned as children, and the chemistry between those two, Gatwa and Gibson, is electric. The best part of the episode is just those two interacting. Any scene. But that's really it. I think the plot on the whole is just kind of uninteresting, and the tones are completely at odds with each other. Setting up almost a story based on the movie Alien with the thing in the basement, and I liked it visually, but again, like I say, it just derails with these bastard kids. It did establish things that are going to be important going forward, such as the snowing unexplainably, and those thematic elements of being abandoned and family, and then some of that would be followed through with the Devil's Chord. We go to the 60s, finally getting an episode featuring the Beatles, which is insane that that hadn't happened yet, and I like it. I like it much more than Space Babies, but it doesn't make nearly as much use of this concept as it can. I really like Maestro, and they're a standout villain for the entire season, a genuinely entertaining and threatening villain. It expands the lore that we had a brief look at in the Giggle about these gods that live beyond the universe, less grounded in sci-fi and dabbling a bit more into fantastical. The laws of science that we know that the show has always vaguely stuck to, but beings that use reality and those laws as toys. And Maestro having music as her gimmick, I guess, works really well. I love how we get to see the dystopian future without music, and how I think it does effectively get across the impact and feeling that music has on the world and individuals. I think that's helped with our first hint of real pain with this Doctor. It had very much seemed like the pain and trauma of the Doctor from the last few years was being left behind with 14, at least somewhat. And as interesting and as effective I found all of that, my one worry was that there's going to be no emotional weight to this new Doctor, but this scene showcases, with Maestro's entrance and using the Giggle and the Doctor just running in fear, this is the first big emotional weighted moment that we get, and the Doctor feeling truly helpless and just being scared, because last time he fought one of these beings, he was literally torn in half, his body and soul. And I really like this. I love this. But unfortunately, it's never really brought up again, and as I said in my videos about the 60th specials, I kind of needed the bi-generation to be explored a bit more to work for me, and this was kind of the only mention. The final act of the episode feels like a really effective tease of Ruby's true parents, and it's a very tense scene, and I like how it ends up being John and Paul to find the final chord, and I then also do enjoy the musical number at the end. I'm not a big fan of musicals, but I don't mind them, you know, like I love the Buffy musical, I enjoyed this. even though I wouldn't really say this is a musical episode. This episode expands on what is seemingly going to be more of the threat going forward, which, as I say, looks to be more of these supernatural gods, as well as setting up multiple threads that we'll see if the outcomes work or not. But overall, whilst I like this episode, I think the overall setting is actually what lets it down, because it never feels like it gets the time to cook and reach its full potential. I think in major part because of the Beatles. They're so sidelined in this episode. I think it's only 2 of them that actually have speaking roles, and especially when it's so heavily marketed and set up that you can't help but feel a bit disappointed. The next episode though saw the return of Stephen Moffat, who absolutely cooked.
I'm Stephen Moffat, and I'm back to write yet another episode of Doctor Who.
One wrong move and boom.
A simple premise utilised incredibly effectively and is an expert in creating tension throughout the entire runtime. The landmine has unique gimmicks, and this is one of only 2 episodes that truly feels like a classic Doctor Who episode this season. I love the character of Monday, I love the Doctor and Ruby's relationship, as this is one of the only episodes where they actually feel tested against each other a little bit in how to handle a situation. It carries on planting seeds as well with yet another appearance of the actress Susan Twist. This episode is one about war and faith, how both are so linked with each other, and how others around attempt to capitalise on those beliefs, such as the Villengard algorithm, the weapons manufacturer selling to every side just enough so that they can keep selling and earning, but not enough so that the war is going to end. And it looks at how faith can blind you to something like that, but not at all accusing faith of being a negative thing. We also revisit the themes of family, with a daughter whose dad is killed by one of the ambulances, and the Doctor is brought face to face with a child who has lost a parent, and whilst yes, the Doctor isn't dead, he left his children and hasn't seen them since and doesn't know where they are. And this is one of the multiple times that this season is mentioning the Doctor's family. It feels we really are drawing attention to that. However, the ending of the episode lets it down a little bit. I still really enjoy it, and it's one of the best episodes of the season, and I like the epilogue, but the actual resolution just feels really rushed. But up until the resolution, I thought the episode was great. Oh boy, here we go. It absolutely is my favourite episode of the season. I think 73 Yards is a masterclass and is up there with some of my favourite episodes of the show. Millie Gibson absolutely shines in this episode, and it is an incredible feat that this was the first episode she filmed. We get a great look at her character and what truly makes her stand out as a companion to me. We also have no Doctor in the episode, which immediately has an effect, as all Doctor-like stories do, because the Doctor is always a barrier of safety, not just for the characters in the story, but for the audience. So immediately we've lost a feeling of safety, and are hit with the absolutely terrifying visual and premise of the episode. A woman stood exactly 73 yards away, no matter where Ruby goes, never getting closer, but never moving away. It's always just there, and even if she can't see it, she knows it's there. This is genuinely terrifying to me. I have a deep-rooted fear of being stalked, so just the imagery is haunting to me, and I hate it. And the episode immediately just throws you off. Everything just feels wrong about this episode, but in the best way. The lack of titles is a great way to open, and again, I hope we get more of this kind of weirdness, because it felt like it should be playing more into the overall events of what's happening in the show, but it doesn't by the end of this season particularly, and so I kind of hope that it isn't just these one-off things. I hope that it delves into it more. But anyway, just after Ruby realizes that this woman is following her, we meet another version of Susan Twist's character, who goes on to talk to this woman, but rather than getting anything meaningful, she immediately runs away screaming. The scene in the pub is perfect horror direction and writing. Although it's funny that all the people in the pub are kind of just fucking with Ruby, that's awesome. But my take on it is, even though all these guys are laughing and having a bit of a joke, and the episode plays it as everything they've said was a bit of a prank, but I don't think that means it's false. I think what they say is actually true, but they just don't believe it personally. I mean, we see later that Gwilliam was actually called Mad Jack, the same name as the stone Ruby turned over, but there's clear parallels here to Wild Blue Yonder, in being on the edge of a cliff, just as in that episode they were on the edge of the universe, where the rules of the universe and the boundaries are thin. So something like a superstition like salt on the floor is more than a superstition, such as something like this fairy circle on the edge of these lands becomes more than just a superstition here. But I do love that we never find out exactly what makes this episode happen. And I understand people finding it too vague, and I do think the ending falls into that trap a little bit, but on the whole, I love not knowing, and it makes it scarier to me. And for me, it mostly does work not knowing. My running theory was that the walls of time and reality have been breaking down since Wild Blue Yonder, hence these two timelines managing to overlap. After the finale, I'm not sure how possible that theory still is, but I still like it and want to run with it. Ruby eventually decides to leave the TARDIS, finally forced to acknowledge maybe the Doctor is gone. So she reunites with her mother, who of course wants to speak to this woman. However, the following interaction is haunting, upsetting, and scary. Ruby's mum has the exact same reaction as everyone else who's tried to speak to this woman, just running away in fear. After saying on the phone, she looks like what she looks like. I love that line. It's so upfront and it's just so simple, but the line delivery is really eerie. And then driving past Ruby with not only fear of whatever this woman said, but a look of disgust, a look of hatred at her own daughter is so rough, leaving Ruby alone again. The theme of abandonment returns here in full force, and that's really what this episode is all about. We see it's not just fear, there is a hatred created for Ruby with this curse, whatever is going on. Her mum has done a full 180 and seems almost disgusted by Ruby to the point where she changed the locks in the flat, leaving Ruby homeless. This timeline forces her to confront her worst fear of being abandoned and left alone yet again. Now that the season is finished, despite flaws I have, particularly with the ending, the thematic side I think is generally intertwined well, and the usage of that fear of being left alone or left behind more than anything wanting to belong. The Doctor explains how the fact he's free of Gallifrey and the Time Lords and everything is a good thing, but deep down he still has that feeling of not belonging, but wanting that connection with anyone. And with Ruby's backstory, she understands that more than a lot of people. The second half of 73 Yards becomes more of a political thriller that isn't as interesting as the more horror-focused first half, but I still think it's pretty great. Roger Ap Gwilliam was named at the start of the episode by the Doctor as one of the most dangerous Prime Ministers, revealing, like I say, that he had the nickname of Mad Jack, and essentially just wants to cause nuclear war. He is a bit of a kind of over-the-top villain, but I like it. I think it works for the episode. We don't really learn much about his specific motivation, but this episode is about Ruby, and in her position, she doesn't know nor need to know. All we see and all we really need to understand is that he's majorly power-hungry and is obsessed with the idea of war and conquering, and he will launch those nuclear missiles if he gets the codes. During this time, we've seen Ruby grow old in one of the most depressing montages in the show, reaching 40 years old in the year 2046. The montage, like I say, is tragic, coming after the brutal unit scene, which is incredible by the way, and really hammers home the hopelessness in the episode. Every kind of safety that is brought up is just crushed, and the only other thing is, where is 14? I'm not someone who's craving Tennant to come back. I love Tennant, but I want the show to move forward, and I want him to come back to kind of close the story, and I'd always be happy for him to come back in if the story would work for that and the character. But right now, with where it's been left, all you can ask is, where's the 14th Doctor in this? Did he go as well? We don't know. This line from Kate is kind of what kicked into gear my theory about timelines converging.
I think this timeline might be suspended along your event.
And like I say, after the last episode, I don't really know if that is going to be the case. But I like that theory, and so, hey. At Gwilliam's speech, Ruby realises this could be her last chance to stop him. And if she's right, she can stop him and save the world. So she lines herself up exactly 73 yards away, bringing the woman face to face with Gwilliam, sending him running in an hilariously good shot, and then just going insane. Ruby then revisits the TARDIS as she's much older, moulded into the scenery surrounding it. It's a really nice scene, but leads to Ruby on her deathbed, where suddenly the woman appears in her room. After leaving the more horror elements behind a bit earlier in the episode and seemingly not having the woman pose a threat to Ruby, taking this left turn in this final scene is brilliant and terrifying. The lights going out, the woman stood with her back and still having those hand movements and getting closer to Ruby as the lights come back on is great horror, and then sending Ruby back in time to the moment that they arrived. And now this is where it does get a little bit messy. This is one of those cases where the text and subtext, despite being balanced really well throughout the entire episode, I think gets a little bit muddled here. With what Ruby says in these final moments, it's a tragic feeling that this woman who caused so many people around Ruby to leave her was the only one who never actually left her. Right until the end, that fear of abandonment was almost suppressed by death, forever following but never getting closer until the right time. As for my theory on what the woman says, I believe that she's just staying who she is, Ruby from beyond the grave, and that's why people run and don't know what to do, because it acts against all the laws that we know of life. And I hope we never find out the true words. It's so much more effective not knowing. I really hope we don't. The lack of concrete resolution does help the episode in my opinion, but it's fun to theorize about, and I really do love the episode. It's so good, but I just think the ending deserved a little better. The thing that would have helped a lot is more time. So that leads us to...
My time is running out.
Now feels like a good time to bring up the format of the show and the length of the season and all of that, because it's way too short. The ambition the team had this season needed at least 2 more episodes, I think. Ideal scenario, I think the season 10 episodes and probably an hour episode each. That gives time for the individual stories to breathe, as well as allow quiet moments for the characters, because there's just too little of those quiet moments in the TARDIS after an adventure discussing what's happened or stuff like that. We need more moments between the pair that actually see them interacting, and that really would have helped develop their relationship and get us invested. But this season is so ambitious as a whole, and each individual episode is, that it needed more time overall. I'm unaware if season 2 will have a different format, but I firmly believe the format of this season has been one of its biggest flaws, if not its biggest, right next to the writing, which we'll get to at the end. I'm assuming season 2 has the same format and will also be releasing at midnight, which, don't even get me, this video is going to be long enough. If I start talking about the midnight releases, I'm going to lose my fucking shit. I just don't think this season is formatted well at all. I think if you want a shorter season, you got to do something like Flux, or even the first half of Series 6, when that culminates in the climactic A Good Man Goes to War. I think its best bet though would have been following in the footsteps of Flux, or again, the longer episode count where you do it across 10 to 13 episodes and you just string it along and have specific episodes that focus on it a bit more. I just think a longer format in one way or the other would have benefited what they wanted to do here, and if they wanted to do the 8 episode 45 minutes, then they needed to change the story.
Now this is a surprise.
2 episodes before the main event, Dot and Bubble, I was really not excited for. It didn't look interesting, it looked goofy. Truthfully, it just looked like a throwaway episode. There's always normally at least one, but lo and behold, it made me feel something. Not only was it enjoyable, everyone in Funtime, except for Ricky, although he probably also was just a twat in his spare time, but they're all just so oblivious, so unaware of reality that their entire perception of life itself is just totally twisted. But this is a case of where they've done it to themselves through choosing this lifestyle and choosing to be oblivious. The episode is pretty funny and kind of laughs at people with the mindset that these people have, and yeah, I fuck with it. It's also really intriguing throughout the entire runtime, and the moment where Lindy sacrificed Ricky was a hard-hitting moment in itself. She'd been annoying the entire episode, and so having this is weird, it's so unexpected, and really brings up a mix of emotions, and really just makes you feel angry. But then proceeding on to refuse refuge with the Doctor and just go to their deaths because of his skin colour. Ncuti puts a standout performance in this scene, portraying the pain of wanting to save these people, thinking they're all a little stupid, yes, but becoming frustrated and not understanding why until it clicks. and it's a truly heartbreaking moment for the character, as he's never had to deal with this personally before. I think one of the positive things about the Whittaker era is how they handled the reaction to the first woman to play the Doctor. This episode was good, fun, emotional, and effective, as well as concrete evidence of the Doctor and Ruby acknowledging Susan here. Doctor Who doing Black Mirror works, who knew? After that, we got Rogue, written by one of the directors of Loki, and Rogue is just a pretty good episode, but it's one of those that I feel like, again, we needed more of, or to just be longer. We need the time before and after the events of each episode to grow these characters, and this episode is a lot of fun. The Doctor and Rogue are a really fun combo, and I can't wait for his inevitable return. The set dressing is brilliant and really gets you invested into the location and time period. One of the better episodes of the season, and I think quite similar to me to A Girl in the Fireplace. And I know that episode's beloved, but I actually think maybe this episode is better. This isn't a perfect episode, but I've never fucked with that one. I just think this one's a bit more fun. I'm gonna get shot now. Ruby feels particularly sidelined in this episode though, and feels as if she has nothing to do, which is a bit of a shame, especially coming right before an episode with her name in the title, and when she's been such a key plot point as well as a character. Now, with this episode also having a painting of Susan, we have this mystery woman firmly ingrained into our heads as well as the characters. So now, we head to the cinema to watch the finale of what is probably Doctor Who's most ambitious story to date.
And his one true name forevermore is...
Part 1 of this story is a goddamn masterpiece, only falling behind 73 yards because of the episode after it, but my god, seeing this in cinema was an absolute dream come true to me. Ever since missing out on Day of the Doctor in 2013 in my local cinema because my parents wouldn't take me, which I was fuming at and I will never forgive you, I've never had the opportunity again until now. So my god, I was insanely hyped because it's not been in a cinema, at least anywhere near here, since 2014 with Deep Breath. In the first 2 minutes we're talking about Susan, and even before the Doctor arrived at Unit, they were looking into her. So immediately it's breaking fan expectations, as just before the credits they say how the Doctor's granddaughter is also called Susan, as well as this mysterious Susan triad, and to throw all that in the pre-titles is such a good opening. Man, when those titles, seeing that in the cinema with the mega speakers, we see the Doctor longs for seeing his granddaughter Susan again, wanting the sense of belonging. Despite enjoying his new realised freedom, he still, maybe now more than ever, feels alone in the universe, which obviously directly ties with Ruby looking for her family. The Doctor explains to Kate why he's never gone back to try and find Susan, and it's a really emotional scene, and I really like it. The Doctor asking Kate about having a time window is really funny as well. He knows, despite ordering them not to fuck with time-related technology, Unit are gonna fuck with it anyway, and it's one of the funniest moments in the episode. They make their way to this cool last set mixed with some great VFX. The time window is a glimpse into the past using memory. As the Doctor reiterates in this episode, memory is time and time is memory. But due to not only Ruby's memory, but the fact they've got a tape from CCTV footage by the church of that night, that gives the window extra power, which takes us into this visually beautiful scene and leads into such a great sequence. There's an uneasy tone from the second it started working, but the mystery grows as more explainable things happen, such as Ruby's mum and the fact that we can't see under the hood no matter how close she gets. There's glitching and just everything is changing. Past is changing the Doctor's memory of the night. It's grown so tense now, and so many questions are being raised, and then a scary ass shape arises in place of the TARDIS. The uncertainty of the Doctor genuinely just not knowing anything of what's going on really hammers home the scale and the stakes here. Yeah, we don't know that it's sinister, but we know it is sinister. After he pushes the Unit soldier Chidozi to look around, despite acknowledging himself that moving around in the time window can be dangerous, the question becomes whether this shape is there with them now, or a recreation from 2004. The booming voice speaks before the time window crashes, revealing Chidozie's corpse that had seemingly been dead for a very long time. This look from Kate as well, blaming the Doctor for this, and the Doctor absolutely feeling that guilt. The Doctor and Mel make their way to finally meet Susan Triad, and there's this great scene where the Doctor is lashing out over Chidozie's death, but Mel gives a great response. Despite her reduced role in the next episode, she's great here. When they finally meet up with Susan, we can see how the Doctor was really praying that this would be his daughter and that he'd recognise her, but it's not. After so long, the sad realisation that it's not her, but they do find out that she has dreams.
Do you dream about being an ambulance?
Of all her other versions, every version that they've encountered, forcing them to stay here because clearly, whatever's going on in this episode, she is related. Unit discovers something at the heart of this sinister shape from the tape of the CCTV footage, and it's the TARDIS. And after scanning the TARDIS that's landed in the Unit building, it's revealed that yes, the shape is a life form and it's there now, but we just can't see it with our eyes. As Susan starts seemingly tweaking out, and Harriet, one of the new characters working for Unit, begins a speech that is haunting and threatening. RTD has always been good at allowing the audience's imagination to go wild. It's a great reveal, bringing the gods back into the story, building up this threat in an incredibly effective way, and this one feels like it's on such a grander scale, and feels just already more powerful than what we've been shown before. We get the actual reveal.
It was the wrong anagram.
Susan Triad Technologies was not an anagram for TARDIS, it was an anagram for Sutek, the god of death. Harriet is revealed to be another harbinger, someone who comes with the warning of a god's arrival. It's a flip on the expectations that have been set up throughout the series, and I do love how this episode subverts and utilises audience expectation and theorising. It's totally to its advantage. Unfortunately, the resolutions aren't great. But the first half of the story nails pretty much everything and does what a part 1 is meant to do and builds the story so well and sets up some great character and universal stakes. So now moving on to the Empire of Death, it opens really strongly. I think this episode feels so slow, and that's because we start with Sutek killing everyone, essentially Thanosing the entire universe, but this surely should have been the cliffhanger in part 1, and I truly think that's what derails the entire story. Because there's also a bit of a time jump, and that would have made much more sense to happen in between episodes. Something that enhanced this problem was the 15-minute interval in the cinema. For sure, seeing both these episodes in the cinema was a great experience and a childhood dream come true. Seeing Doctor Who on the big screen, awesome, great atmosphere, but that 15-minute break would have worked fine if the episodes weren't paced so strangely. The hype going into the second part was crazy, and the opening was really fun, but then as soon as that happens, you just automatically know that they're all going to be back by the end. The memory TARDIS, I kind of hate it, I'll be honest. I've not watched Tales of the TARDIS, and from this episode, it's kind of led to me having no intention to. It looks like they're in a cupboard. It's a bizarre choice, but I like the reaction of the Doctor seeing the death of the universe.
The end of the universe!
Every son is dead. Liar!
This is another one of my problems though. This is the next series after Flux. Now, yeah, I know it handles it pretty differently, but it feels so similar visually and just atmospherically. We even spend time talking to someone who survived on a derelict planet. And I know Flux came out in 2021, but that was Series 13 and this is Series 14. It is the next series. It feels all too similar, and I actually think, now bear with me here, I actually think that Flux handles the specific elements of a universe-ending threat a little bit better. I just think it was a big mistake to have a universe-devastating key plot in the direct series after it. I like seeing the ground-level survivors though, where there obviously has been a time jump, and again, like I said, why I think the pacing should have been reworked. But the stuff with the spoon is stupid. I guess you could argue it's setting up the reveal for Ruby's mom, like this spoon we're told is something important, and then to see that it's not, but it still has an impact. Like, I don't know if that was the intention, I get it if it was, but it still just feels like a waste of time. And this is where the next key problem arises. Some more supernatural shit starts to happen with Ruby, where we see footage of Roger and McWilliam, and so they go to 2046 to find the name of Ruby's mother, as they would have had Ruby's mother's name due to, in the year 2046, this Prime Minister brought in legal enforced blood testing for everyone. But now that raises the question as to why the ambulances didn't pick this up in Boom. That was in the future, right? Mel is also possessed by Sutek, by the way. She takes him straight to him, where we do get a pretty good confrontation with the Doctor being knocked out of action and Ruby giving this speech. And it really does build up the hype, and I do love the moment where Ruby drops the tablet. However, just whacking a lead onto Sutek and dragging him into the vortex, like, look, it's kind of baller as fuck, and it's visually a lot of fun, and I love all the performances throughout the sequence, but the fact that all they had to do to defeat the god of death, this whole new realm that we've been introduced to this season of gods and supernatural and stuff beyond the universe, all they had to do was put it on a dog lead and fly through time, which is also, again, last time the Doctor sent Sutek into the time vortex, he survived. It's just not very satisfying. Oh, and yeah, the fact that he has apparently been clinging onto the TARDIS since that original Tom Baker episode, I don't hate it, but it doesn't really hold up to any scrutiny. I mean, I get he was in a dormant state or something, or at least that's what I assume, but the TARDIS wasn't always making these noises it had been in recent episodes. And where were all the other season twists? What happened when the TARDIS exploded or got possessed? What happened in Flatline? Bro was just chilling in Clara's bag?
Stop laughing, this is serious.
Is there a second Sutek on the duplicate TARDIS? I think it would have just worked so much better if he'd latched onto it during Wild Blue Yonder. That's the first appearance of Susan Twist and the first time the TARDIS makes the noise again. I think the fact the ending to this villain is such a letdown means that this kind of scale can't really be overlooked, because if he had been around for that long and survived everything, it's gotta be more challenging to our characters to defeat him. Also, this line from the Doctor doesn't totally hold up either, because literally in the Christmas special he killed the Goblin King, like impaled him on a fucking church.
I must become a monster.
Now, we have the moment we've been waiting for, one of the biggest mysteries of the season, Ruby's mother. The trickster. Susan. Something else entirely. Obviously something important, because look at everything that's happened this season. The snow falling, the fact that we couldn't see her. Right? Right? Actually, we've been punked by Russell T Davies, and she's just an ordinary woman. I get it. I really do what it's going for, and especially with Doctor Who, the trend of universally important companions. Like, I love the concept here, but from what this season has done, what we've been presented with, and then what this last episode tells us, just doesn't work. We've been shown all these supernatural things happening around Ruby, and the show builds plot on the basis of that, but having just the thought that was giving these supernatural things, like, meaning, like that's how they happened, it just doesn't hold up. And I don't want to stick on this bit for too long, but I know it's The Last Jedi, I know it's doing that, but that works, or at least if you ignore what came after that. Rey having built up this curiosity and mystery of supposedly meant to be a part of something bigger, but in actuality, she can choose her own life, she can choose her own path. I love that, not having to be tied down to anything, not having to be tied down to someone else's past. But in The Last Jedi, it's in service of character development, but in this series of Doctor Who, it's more just for hype, and just feels lazy and honestly kind of insulting to the audience. So to me, it just fails. Now that said, I do love the scene where Ruby actually finds her mother. It's a strong emotional scene, and I love her departure from the TARDIS. I know she's coming back next season, but nonetheless, I love how the Doctor is so understanding before Ruby even says anything, but also at the same time heartbroken. Ruby is discovering herself and her family, but she can't do that whilst travelling across time and space. This is what she's always wanted. She's found her family despite the anxiety of what she'd find, whereas the Doctor was really hoping to find something and found nothing. I have to say, on the whole, season 1 of Doctor Who disappointed me.
I think it's time to play the game.
I think I'm just about more positive on it than negative, but it is the worst series by Davies by far for me. Also, the whole rebranding, the series count, was an awful decision. It's an awful jumping off point for new fans for so many reasons. Having the Doctor's family being a key talking point, as well as the big bad being Sutek, who was a classic villain. As much as I love it without seeing classic Who, this series framed itself on being accessible to newcomers, but it doesn't act like that in any way. It's so heavy on what came before, particularly the 60th specials. which is a direct continuation from Power of the Doctor, which is obviously a direct continuation from Flux, and obviously they all came like back to back, and obviously those 60th specials follow directly into the Christmas special, which follows into the season, which again, I myself have no problem with because I have been following it, but it's annoying to now just have like something pretend, almost try and frame itself as something new, when it's not really. It's series 14. It is series 14. It's not season 1. I'm sorry, it's not. And the fact that it's doing that means the entire season has a feeling of being divided on what it wants to be. As much as The Giggle does set the show for a reboot in an interesting way, it doesn't follow through on that, and as mentioned earlier, totally ruins the world building. Having another Doctor just sat around with the TARDIS in a position where we know he still travels somewhat, so why isn't he involved in anything going on? I feel like there's a lot in this era that is feeling as if there was a clear route to go down, but for whatever reason, they went another way, which I know you don't want to be predictable, but you also don't want to be bad. They seem to just choose baffling decisions. Like for the Sutek latching on thing. Like, Wildly Yonder is right there. Russell, you wrote it! Obviously, already had a whole segment dedicated to how the format of the show really hurts it for me, and I really do believe that either just more episodes or longer episodes would have helped immensely. I hope they saw this result after finishing season 1 and adapted to make it work better for the next season. I don't think this shorter episode run works for Doctor Who, at least these kind of series anyway, unless telling a more connected and serialized story like Flux or like Children of Earth. And honestly, as opposed to how the series tries to adapt a more modern TV style, I think the best way to have done this with a shorter episode count would have been that more serialized story, because that is what a lot of modern TV is. Flux did the format better, I'm sorry, but I really think it did. Also, the fourth wall breaks. They've been really intriguing and I've really enjoyed them. It feels fresh and it felt like important to the story. And with the story having kind of this approach and ideas of gods beyond the universe and you know, things breaking down, I thought the fourth wall breaks were going to link into that somehow, but at least as of right now, there's no sign of that. And don't think after 60 years, with only the odd exception of a fourth wall break, you can't just start throwing them in as if it's Deadpool. Especially because we see that they're in-world. That scene with Mrs. Flood I thought was great, but it's left unclear if that's going to be explained. I think I've learned to take anything RTD says with a grain of salt, because for someone who seems to be focusing more on the success of the show right now as opposed to the actual content, he's saying things that are hurting the potential success of the show. Now, I am aware that when this was commissioned, 2 seasons were commissioned, so there was probably a plan across 1 or 2 seasons, and probably ideas at the very least for how to go after that. But even when there's a long-term plan, it doesn't just forgive the lack of satisfaction that we've just got now. Now, on a personal level, due to my just personal life, I really connected with the themes of abandonment and that anxiety, and I think that's another reason why I love 73 Yards. That kind of concept is something that I struggle with daily, and not to get too deep, but that is a genuine fear of mine and something that I've spoken a lot about with different people in my life. And that's why it's even more frustrating, because the themes are there, and themes that particularly work for me, and I see them executed at times really well, but there's just such a lack of answers, and the answers we did get weren't good enough. They did not feel in service of the story or character, but of attention, which is the entire opposite of how the original RTD era felt, and I have to say, I'm very anxious going forward. I know this is the longest video I've done on my channel, so if you've managed to stick with me, cheers lads. Let me know your thoughts on this season. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. I know it's a real mixed bag amongst the fandom, but I can't wait to hear what you all think.